A serious warning to all drivers because this could have been catastrophic, and it's no exaggeration, it is not clickbait, so please do listen to this story and take notice. There are some serious legal implications here that are far more complex than might at first seem. But first of all, if you're new to me, I am Daniel Shensmith, a barrister of England and Wales. Please do hit that subscribe button if you want free legal guidance. It's not advice, but it's free guidance that I've been providing for over 4 years now to help you understand law. About 70% of the 3 to 5 million of you every month that watch don't subscribe. So please do hit that button and I'd have loads more subscribers. I'd be really grateful. Thanks for doing that. So this story is quite a shocking one. It was told to me personally, and I know the person involved, and I gave severe warnings as to what might have happened. So what happened was this: nothing out of the ordinary and nothing that most drivers hadn't done before. They needed 2 new tyres. So they went to a website, and there's a side point about contract law, which I'll just briefly cover in this video as well. They went to a website, they put in the registration number, and the website told them what size and type of tyres they needed. They ordered those 2 tyres up, and the man arrived with the 2 tyres to fit them very shortly after. Now, as the side point, the website was wrong, as in it told them the wrong size of tyre, which was the underpinning catalyst to this whole story. Because when the guy turned up with the tyres, he very quickly realised they were wrong, and then they arranged for new tyres to come out. The side point, before I go on with the story, is this: if the website was wrong, then you can just return them. Now, this wasn't an issue in this case, but I can imagine some companies and some websites potentially arguing that, well, you ordered them, you paid for them, you've got to keep them. But that would not be in accordance with consumer rights because, for not least of which, they're ordered online, so you can return them. But also, if the website gave you the wrong details, it's the website's fault. That aside, because that wasn't an issue in this story, what was the issue was this: the guy turned up to fit these 2 new tyres to the vehicle at the person's address. He, first of all, went around the vehicle and loosened all of the bolts on both of the wheels that the tyres needed replacing for. Now, this is a fairly common thing because obviously they loosen the bolts while the vehicle is on the ground, otherwise the wheel spins around a bit in the air or whatever. I've seen that before. And so what he did was loosen all of the bolts on both of the wheels. He took one of the wheels off completely, took it to the van to change the tyre, very quickly realised the tyre was wrong, came back to the vehicle owner and said, "I'm really sorry, they've given us the wrong size tyre. Not a problem, we'll order up the new ones, I'll be back later or tomorrow, and I'll just have to put this back on for now." So he put that wheel back on, tightened up all the bolts, and left. Now, if it wasn't clear, he didn't tighten the bolts on the other side. So this driver was then driving around for a week with loose bolts on one of those wheels, which could quite feasibly have come off. Now, this could obviously have had a catastrophic outcome, and is the reason that I am quite pedantic about taking photographs and making documented notes of everything in case I ever need to go to court with it later. I take photographs, I make notes. If I have a telephone conversation, I make a telephone attendance note, just as I do as a lawyer. I do that for my own things as well. And it's one of the reasons that we built the app Proofify to store evidence that you might need to use in court later. Because if you don't plan ahead for these kind of things, one of the biggest difficulties we have as lawyers is getting all of your evidence together and getting all of your story together so that it can be best represented in court. So check out Proofify, where you can store your evidence. Now, quite obviously, had these bolts come loose, let's say on the motorway with the vibrations, and let's say the wheel came off, this could have been a catastrophic event. But then who's to blame? Quite obviously, most of the blame, not necessarily all, but most of the blame would lay at the door of the guy and the company that came to fit the tyres but didn't tighten the bolts of the wheel. But here's where it will catch a lot of drivers out. Every driver, before they set out on a journey, particularly a motorway journey and a long journey, should make sure that the vehicle is fit for that journey, which includes everything that they could reasonably be expected to check. Now, on the one hand, there is no specific law, so far as I'm aware, and I'll stand to be corrected, that mandates drivers check the tightness of the wheel nuts on every wheel before every journey. However, there is a general duty of care for all drivers to check the roadworthiness and have reasonable care and attention to that vehicle and its readiness for that journey, else they might be in breach of that duty of care to other road users if the vehicle is not roadworthy. But let's play this out for a moment. Let's say that the vehicle did go on the motorway, the bolts were loose enough that they did come loose, the wheel came off, that caused a catastrophic collision between it and several other vehicles. Is it reasonable to have expected that driver to have checked the tightness of those bolts? Now, ordinarily, had there not been a recent change of the tyres, you might say, well, how would a driver know whether the bolts are quote-unquote tight enough when going on that journey? Well, reasonably, they might not be expected to know exactly how tight they are. They won't have a proper gauge to test the tightness. Even if they did have a wrench and went around to check that they are all tight, they wouldn't necessarily know whether they are tight enough or over tight, which, not being a mechanic, might be just as much of a problem. I don't know. However, given that there had been a recent attempt to change the tyres, an aborted attempt because they were the wrong size, I can well imagine an insurance company trying to rely on that fact to say that the driver failed to check and failed to exercise reasonable diligence to ensure that those bolts were adequately tightened. After all, they could have stood there to watch to make sure it was done properly. This is obviously not to say that the mechanic and company replacing the tyres are exculpated from liability. Of course, they will be liable because he failed to retighten the bolts. But there is also in law something that we call contributory negligence, meaning that the court can find one party negligent, like principally negligent, in that they had a duty of care, they failed to exercise that duty of care, and it caused damage through the breach. The court can also attribute contributory negligence on another party, meaning if there was a road traffic collision and the driver, having a general duty of care, might be found to be in breach of that duty of care had they failed to adequately ensure that these bolts were retightened after the aborted attempt at replacing the tyres. Now, that could be anything from 0 to 100% liability. So the court can find that one party was liable, but they could find that the other party, I mean, it wouldn't be likely in this case, could be liable up to and including 100% contributory negligence in that claim. Now, in a case like this, even if the court did find the driver liable by way of contributory negligence, I would expect that to be a relatively small amount, but could still be 5 or 10%, and it could still be a point upon which that an insurance company attempts to refuse a claim. So this is a stark warning to all drivers that if you have someone replacing your tyres, you should at the very least observe that they have retightened all of the bolts and make a note that you've done so. Because even if they are not adequately tightened, if you've made a note that they have indeed tightened, or so far as you are aware, they have tightened these bolts, if you then later get to court and an opposing barrister, perhaps for the insurance company, is saying you didn't check that they had tightened the bolts, did you? You didn't exercise your duty of care as a road user to ensure that those bolts were tight, did you? You are partly responsible, aren't you? Is what the other barrister might say. If you were to say, well, so far as I'm concerned, I observed the mechanic retightening the vehicles. You might even film them tightening the bolts. Or at the very least, I would take a photograph of them tightening the bolts, which is something you could store on Proofify. We're working on video, but you could take a photograph of them tightening the bolts. So then if you end up in court later with the insurance company blaming you for not exercising your reasonable care, to exercise your duty of care to making the vehicle roadworthy, you could say, well, I've done the best that I could in that I ensured that this mechanic retightened those bolts afterwards. Had he not done so adequately, then the liability lies at his door for not properly tightening those bolts. You might then reasonably say, I can't be expected to know that he hasn't tightened them properly. But you could be expected, quite arguably, you could be expected to at least have observed the mechanic retightening those bolts, particularly if it's on your driveway. Might be a different story. Well, it would be a different story in my view had you gone to the garage and you're not permitted in the garage area, and so far as you are aware, they have replaced the wheels and retightened the bolts. Now, you could still check, arguably, that they are more than just finger tight and certainly not finger loose, because finger tight would be finger loose, before you go on a long journey. But this, nonetheless, is a warning, because I can see now these legal issues arising in the event that there's a massive claim with multiple vehicles all laying the blame at you as the driver. And if your insurance company gets wind of this fact that they had recently been an attempt to replace the tyres, which failed, which resulted in loose bolts, and that was the cause of the collision, I can see the problems arising in court. So all of these problems are better dealt with before they happen. So make sure you pay attention, make sure you take notes, ideally take photographs, even better if you can take video, and store the evidence. As I say, we're working on video for Proofify, but you can certainly store the photographs and your notes of what happened, who it was, when it was, where it was, what they did, the fact that they retightened them. Just be that little bit diligent when these things are happening, and you'll do your best to avoid any liability. I hope that's useful. Please take the warning. Leave me your thoughts and comments. Please do subscribe. And as always, thank you for watching.